So, in October 1938, there were reports of mass panic breaking out in America. This was because of a Halloween broadcast of an episode of the radio series The Mercury Theatre on air. The episode was an adaptation of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It was performed and broadcast live over the CBS radio network, and it was done in a breaking news style. As they listened, people became convinced that it was true, that a Martian invasion was taking place, and they panicked. It's one of those infamous moments in broadcast history. The scale of panic is actually disputed, as the programme had relatively few listeners, but the point is, the broadcast was credible. It broke into existing programming, and it was on a network that people trusted, so it was so easy to believe that it was true. In this post-truth age, it's becoming really hard to know who or what we can trust, and whether what we are hearing about is credible or not, especially now in this age of social media and influencers, and with various lawsuits that are taking place against newspapers for printing false stories. How many times do we hear about something that's absolutely feasible from a supposedly reliable source, only to find out that the source of the story has been totally discredited, and what we've heard is totally incorrect? In this post-truth society, it's very hard to know what's true and what isn't. When it comes to the Bible, a lot of people have the same problem. It was written so long ago about events that happened thousands of years ago. How can we know we can trust it? Some of the things that we read in the Bible are really surprising and absolutely incredible. People tell us it's true, but can we really believe them? Can we really know what we are reading is true? Over the next 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, we're going to be exploring the beginning of Luke's Gospel together. And we're going to be reading about some extraordinary and incredible things that lead up to Jesus being born. Although our reading today doesn't give us any great revelations about Jesus, I believe that this passage absolutely does assure us that Luke has thoroughly researched what happened, that he has recorded the truth that he has discovered, and that we can trust and believe that what we will be exploring together over the next 4 weeks is credible and true. So let's look together at Luke's explorations in more detail. It might be helpful if you've got the Bible open again, and it's page 1035, and it's the first 4 verses of the Gospel of Luke. But before we get into the passage, I think a quick bit of background information about who and Luke and Theophilus were will be a helpful starting point. We can have every reason to trust that Luke was a real person. It's most likely that he is the Luke mentioned by Paul as one of his close friends and companions. Colossians 4:14 mentions our dear friend Luke the doctor. In Philemon verse 24, Paul says that Luke sends his greetings. In 2 Timothy 4:11, Paul says that only Luke is with him. Luke also wrote the book of Acts, which we've just been going through over the last few weeks. Some sections of Acts, for example, chapters 20 and 21, are written in the first person. We went there, we did this, which adds weight to the evidence that Luke was with Paul. Luke was writing to someone called Theophilus. Not much is known at all about him. He could have been a Roman governor or a local official. But his name actually means lover of God. So he might not actually have been a person at all. It could have just have been a literary device, a way of Luke addressing anyone who had heard about Christianity, who was a lover of God. So let's turn to our reading. Luke writes in verse 1 that many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. In verse 2, he says that those accounts were handed down to us by those who, from the first, or from the beginning, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. That phrase, from the first or from the beginning, tells us that those eyewitness accounts were given by people who had been with Jesus from the start, those with personal experience of Jesus. We know that one of those accounts was the Gospel of Mark, as Luke has used a lot of Mark's material in his Gospel. We know that although Mark wasn't with Jesus, he was with Peter, one of the disciples, and would have had a first-hand account from him of everything that had happened. In verse 3, Luke begins by telling us that he has carefully investigated those eyewitness reports from the beginning. The Living Bible puts it differently, which for me helps this verse make more sense. It reads, "It occurred to me that it would be well to recheck all those accounts from first to last, from top to bottom. He's checked them right through from the beginning to the end." Being a doctor, Luke knew the importance of being methodical and thorough, so it would have been properly done. We know from the book of Acts and Paul's letters that Paul visited Jerusalem and met with some of the disciples. Being a close friend of Paul's, it's very likely that Luke would have travelled to Jerusalem with Paul, and as part of that methodical research, he would have had the opportunity to interview the disciples and verify what he'd heard. All this has helped him to conclude that the information in these accounts is true. It can be trusted. Verse 3 ends with Luke telling us that he's decided that the best thing he can do is draw everything that he's verified together, all these accounts here, there and everywhere, and write an orderly account of the events. Just to note that the words orderly account don't necessarily mean that the gospel is in chronological sequence. It could also be a thematic order or a topical order. But whatever, he decided that he needed to do this. And the reason? Look at verse 4. He has put this account together so that Theophilus, or a person who loves God, may know the certainty of the things he has been taught. Again, the Living Bible uses the words, to reassure you of all the things you have been taught. Luke has thoroughly researched everything. He's verified that the accounts were accurate accounts of actual historical events and has concluded that they could be trusted. They were true. Excuse me, I've got a frog. Luke was from Greece, and this gospel was written in Greek. Now, the Greek in these particular verses is some of the best Greek that can be found in the Bible. It's similar in standard to the Greek you'd find in the works of historian and other writers from that period. He's writing a credible document that can stand alongside those other historical works. Over the next 4 weeks, we'll be studying the Gospel of Luke, looking together at the events leading up to Jesus' birth. They are surprising and extraordinary, but I believe that these verses we've just looked at can assure us that as we do this, we too can know the certainty of the things we are reading and hearing. We can accept that they are true. Now, this is not me just saying blindly accept it. In these verses, I think that Luke began from a baseline of believing that what he has heard was true, but he wanted to verify it all through to make sure. As Luke did, we too should study what we read, think about it, explore it, maybe compare it with other Gospels. But I do believe that as we do this, like Luke, we can start from that baseline that what we are reading is true. Today, as we've heard, we enter the season of Advent, and it's also the start of the new liturgical year for the church. We've lit our first candle in our Advent crown. At St Edmund's, I've changed the colour to purple on the altar. But Advent is about so much more than colours and candles. The early church thought it was inappropriate to just crash in and celebrate the birth of Jesus, the biggest event of history, without some kind of preparation. It became a habit to have a season of preparation, which became known as Advent, reflecting and focusing on the coming of Jesus as a baby in Bethlehem. Focusing and reflecting on just what it means that Jesus became man and was born in Bethlehem throughout Advent is something we still do today. I always feel like the 1st of December is the day that the starting gun is fired on Christmas. We have to face up to the fact that Christmas is in just 4 weeks' time. Yes, it really is. And start to prepare in earnest. We need to get the Christmas shopping done, start to get the food in, decorate the house. Maybe, if you're a minister, get those Christmas sermons and services finally sorted. Try not to get frazzled. As we go through this season of Advent, doing what the early church did, reflecting and exploring together, instead of rushing around and getting frazzled and chasing your tail, why not try and find the time to use this as a season of preparation for Christmas, just like the early church did? We can trust that what we're exploring is true, so engage with the readings, listen to the talks, think about them, discuss them together. Maybe consider buying the Advent devotional this week. Maybe even find time to read it. I know what it's like. My prayer for us all is that as we do this together over the next 4 weeks, if we can find time in the middle of everything to listen for God's voice, we will discover that we have a God who loves us and who delights to reveal himself to us. I believe we will discover new and surprising things about God, and that we will become more and more aware of him and his love for us. May we celebrate Christmas this year knowing, loving and trusting God more than we have ever done before. Amen.